Okay, rolling live. Thank you all.
Good evening and welcome to the first edition of Beyond the Headline, what we hope will be a regular series of policy discussions designed to dig deep into top issues facing Fort Worth, Tarrant County, and Texas. For those of you online, we want to thank our hosts here at Texas A&M University Law School in downtown Fort Worth for providing the venue. Our first topic for this series goes by many names: school choice, school vouchers, and lately educational savings accounts. But generally, it's the idea of letting families use public funds to cover private education and other expenses, including some homeschooling expenses. It's been on the table for years, but right now the legislature in a special session called by Governor Abbott is considering a plan that would create the first widespread voucher program, or ESA program as it's called, in Texas. We have two experts on the topic here tonight to guide us through it and give us their perspective. Taking the pro position is Corey DeAngelis. He has been described as a school evangelist. He's the senior fellow at the American Federation for Children and executive director of the Educational Freedom Institute. Taking the anti-position, we have Scott Milder. He's founder of Friends of Texas Public Schools and a principal at the VLK Architects firm. So, gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and start us right off with the current news and what's currently on the table. The Texas Senate has passed a bill that would provide $500 million over 2 years for current public school students to have educational savings accounts of $8,000 each. Tell us why you think this particular bill is a good idea or a bad one. Corey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, education funding is meant for educating children, not for propping up and protecting a particular institution. The funding should follow the student, not the system. And a lot of other states have already done this. In the past 2 years alone, 10 states controlled by Republican legislatures have gone all in on school choice, regardless of income, regardless of family background. Every single family in these other 10 states, 1 in 5 states in the country, can take their children's education dollars to the education provider they're choosing. That could be a public school if you want. If you like your public school, you can keep your public school, but for real this time. But if not, you can take that funding, which is the state portion, to a private school to pay for tuition and fees, a charter school, or another home-based education option. It's the idea of the funding following the student as opposed to the institution. Just like we do with higher education, students come here to this school using Pell Grants, public taxpayer dollars that can be used at public universities if you want, or community colleges if you want, but you can also take that funding to a private religious or non-religious university. We do the same thing with pre-K programs and the federal Head Start program. Those are public taxpayer dollars that can be used at any provider of pre-K that best meets the needs of the individual families. That even could be a religious provider of pre-K. And then we also do this with food stamps and Section 8 housing vouchers. Vouchers are all fine and dandy for everything else, every other industry, every other level of education. But there's an entrenched special interest only when it comes to those in-between years, the 12 education, the teachers and superintendents who fight as hard as possible against any change to the status quo. Why would you support choice for everything else, but not K-12 education? The answer is obvious. It has nothing to do with law and everything to do with power. And hopefully Texas can get this done, get it across the finish line. The Senate's already passed Senate Bill 1, 18-13, handily passed the Senate. It's now in the House, and hopefully the House can come to an agreement as well.
And there's several issues we can dig in particular. But Scott, tell us in general why you think that this is not a great idea.
Sure. Well, I first want to tell you a little bit about the messenger, just for 10 seconds. You know that because that's important. People think advocate for public ed that we must be a liberal. I am actually a very conservative Republican my entire life, voting. And I agree with Governor Abbott on many issues. Most of the issues, most of his approaches to things, I agree with. But I think he's flat wrong. Mr. DeAngelis is flat wrong about. First of all, people have forgotten what the purpose of public schools are, and I'm talking about independent school districts, schools specifically. We don't pay taxes. We don't pay school taxes to educate our children. We all pay school taxes to educate all children. When we start giving vouchers out, so that some of them, very small percentage, by the way, even for $500 million, when we start giving those vouchers out and a few of them leave, it's no longer a public system for all, private system for a handful, and it's a system for the private good of some and not the public good of all. And then I just want to say also that in order to preserve have here and the success of America, frankly, I know there's lots of faults. We have friends in Texas public schools. Don't pretend that our public schools are perfect. We have lots of challenges, lots of struggles, but there are great people working on our public schools every single day. I don't know a lot of our school leaders. They all started out teaching. They're all led by their heart. And there is not a lot of power grabs coming out of our school leadership in our public schools. I'll tell you that from my personal experience. And I do want to say that before we move on, just going to say that we actually already have vouchers in Texas. And we have had vouchers in Texas for multiple decades. They're called charter schools. We have 1,028 charter schools in Texas. If I decide I can choose to take my 3 children out of my school district and move them to a charter school, and guess what? Their funding, the dollars follow them to that charter school. That's how the charter school is funded. That's why they are free tuition schools, because the money is following that. That is a voucher that goes to the charter school with 1,000+ campuses sprinkled out across Texas. By the way, many of them in communities where schools are rated A's or B's. It doesn't really serve the purpose. But if you want to argue that we don't have choice in Texas, that's just flat wrong. We have plenty of choice in Texas. And frankly, it's of my opinion that our public schools serve a very specific purpose. And choice, well, you know what? I'm gonna hang on to that. I'm gonna hang on to that just a minute. I'm running over there. I'm gonna turn it back over.
That's a teaser. I like it. Corey, go
If
ahead.
we already have so much choice, and that's a good thing, why would you object to additional choices for private schools? Why should your choice set be limited to schools that are run by the government? It shouldn't be. Just like with everything else, we're not assigned to a government grocery store, and we don't force families that are using food stamps to take their food stamp dollars to residentially assigned government-run grocery stores. That wouldn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for K-12 education either. We don't do that with college or pre-K either. Families can make the decision, and the funding follows their student. But I agree, charter schools are a good form of school choice in Texas. I went to public schools in Texas growing up, all through K through 12. In high school, to go to something called a magnet school. That's a form of school choice that already exists in Texas, but it's a school that's run by the government. I think that was a great opportunity for me, but your choice set shouldn't be limited to schools that are run by the government. You should be able to take them to private providers, particularly if you're a religious family who wants to pursue a religious education for your kid. And if you want to say that that's a separation of church and state issue, it's not. Vouchers do not violate the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution for the same reason Pell Grants don't. That's taxpayer dollars directed by students that can be used at private religious universities.
Let me hold you there, Corey. We'll get to that. I want to talk a little bit about the scale of what we're dealing with, especially with the Texas plan. And Scott, I'll start with you. The state spends $80 billion over a biennium. That's 2 years. If you went to Fort Worth schools, 2 years. I'm just kidding. And we have 5 million public school students, 5 million plus. What's the threat of a $500 million program for 50,000, 57,000, I think students they're estimating, the entire system that's that large?
Oh man, where do you start? There's many threats. First of all, it's a $1 billion system out the gate. It's not 500 million. It's 500 million annually for 2 years. So that's 1 billion, and included in the bill that's passed on Friday is an 8% administrative fee allocation for the people and organizations, private sector organizations, the state's going to hire to administer the program. You know, do math real quick. Earlier, I'm not. I try not to do it in public.
My calculator.
8% of $500 million is $40 million. So over the course of the year, that's $80 million they're asking us to spend to administer this program. And then there's a lot of other reasons why vouchers are not a good solution for Texas. One, we already have roughly 1 million children in Texas who opted out of the school districts and are going to private schools or homeschool. And when the voucher system passes, the large majority of students who are going to benefit from a voucher are already in private school, already being homeschooled. And so it's not going to help. It's a very small percentage of students that they say they're trying to help by saving them from failing, struggling schools, which, by the way, only 6%, according to the state of Texas, only 6% of campuses across the state of Texas are actually failing.
The court.
Is there a microphone
Yeah, we can closer.
Might need to be
Is this better?
might need to be a little closer. Okay, sorry about
Hold
that.
it.
I have to eat that thing.
Sorry about that, y'all. Corey, let me
Yeah.
phrase the question to you in a similar way, but from the other perspective. Well, a lot of the talk from school choice advocates is that the public schools will get better. How does that going to happen with a relatively small program?
Yeah, look, if the government schools are doing such a great job, and if only 6% of them are failing, then they shouldn't have anything to worry about. The public schools in Texas spend about $15,700 per student per year, according to the TEA website, from the most recent school year. The voucher amount's only about $8,000 or $10,000 per student. So, mathematically, you don't need a calculator for this. If a full student leaves and the public school keeps thousands of dollars for students who are no longer educating, mathematically on a per student basis, they're going to end up with higher expenditures per student and higher revenues per student. Just imagine if you stopped shopping at HEB and you wanted to go to Walmart for whatever reason, and HEB got to keep half of your grocery funding each week. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. It'd be a good deal for HEB that they get to keep a lot of your money. The public schools should be thrilled about this proposal because they get to keep thousands of dollars for students who are no longer educating. On a per student basis, they end up better off. And there are competitive effects as well of school choice. UT Austin researchers, Jabbar and her team, published a peer-reviewed study in 2019 in educational policy, finding that if you pull all the effect sizes together of the studies existing on the topic, private school choice competition leads to better outcomes in the public schools, not worse. School choice is a rising tide that lifts all boats. If you want to count the studies out, there are 29 on the subject. 26 of the 29 studies find statistically significant positive effects of private school choice competition on the outcomes in the public schools. We don't want to destroy public schools. We don't want to defund them. We actually want them better, and we see this as the way to do so. And if you want to fearmonger about this destroying the school system, the burden of proof should be on you to provide that evidence. The reality is there isn't evidence on that subject. It's actually the opposite. Public and private school choice competition leads to better outcomes in the public schools, not worse. And by the way, this money doesn't belong to the schools, public or private. It belongs to the families and their students. They're at least the intended beneficiaries of that funding, and they should be able to decide where that funding goes. I think there's a lot of great public schools in Texas, and families should and will still have that option. And look, a lot of other states have done this. Look at Florida. They've expanded school choice over the past couple of decades. They went universal, passing school choice for all families this year as well. And they found that since they expanded school choice over the past couple of decades, it's gone from about the bottom of the pack in the nation's report card, the NAEP assessment, to the top handful or so, depending on the outcome you look at after adjusting for student demographics across states. So Florida is an example of how this has improved the school system overall, hasn't made it worse.
You moved pretty smoothly into my next topic. That's great. Scott, do you want to talk about evidence that you've seen that you're concerned about in places where there have been some choice programs and how those have affected schools?
Sure, yeah. Of the 8 or 10 8 or 10 states where they have passed voucher programs over the last 10 years, over the first 10 years of the program, I think in 2018, those voucher programs have had 800% increases in funding, while the school systems in every one of those states have had negative percentage decreases in funding for the schools. It does take money away, and it does cost money to educate kids. I do want to say that Ryan keeps talking about, I'm sorry, Corey, you're Ryan. Corey keeps talking about these government schools. Hey, they're funded by our government. Well, they're underfunded by our government. The schools themselves are not government schools. They're operated by our local communities. I have a good friend on my local school board. We go to church together. And I voted. I elected him. And if he starts doing a job I don't think is good, I'm gonna try to elect him. That's what we have. And one of the primary concerns about these voucher programs is the vouchers have no strings attached to them at all. In fact, the executive committee of the Republican Party of Texas, my executive committee, is caught on hot mic talking about how there's not going to be any strings at all because we're talking about education freedom, and freedom means they can do whatever the heck they want to with their money. They want to go buy a flat screen TV, they can buy a flat screen TV.
Are there flat screen TVs in the public schools?
Yeah,
but they go on field trips in the public schools too.
Absolutely. They have the tools they need. Yeah. Okay. Golly, that is just
Well, let me jump in here then, Corey. How would you address this accountability question? Because it does come up a lot. Should there be a mechanism? Should there be some performance review that the taxpayers can look at to see what they're
There's
getting.
the
for their money.
ultimate form of accountability built into the school choice system, which is underperforming private schools shut down, underperforming government schools get more money year after year because they can go back to the legislature and say, we're failing because we need more money. Well, you know what? Bottom-up accountability is the only true form of accountability. The public schools in Dallas that only have proficiency rates of 32% in math, they have all those strings attached to them. Has that led to the improvements that we'd like to see in the public school system? The better way to improve the public schools is to give them real competitive pressures from the bottom up, allow families to vote with their feet, just like we do in every other level of education and every other industry, just like we do in so many other states. It's not just 8 states that have school choice. There are 31 states at least now that have some form of private school choice that has been enacted over the past few decades. It's just 10 that have gone universal.
We have private school choice. It's called charter schools. And by the way, the ISDs outperformed charter schools in every grade level, every subject tested in the STAR.
Did you adjust for student demographic differences?
Of course,
across the schools?
Well, if you want to talk about student demographics, the ISDs educate every kid. The charter schools get to pick and choose, and the private schools will still pick and choose. So the only real choice we're talking about here, if we pass vouchers, is we're fueling private schools' ability to choose whichever student they want. Guess what? They're not going to choose the kids who have learning disabilities or physical disabilities, or they live in poverty. They can't get to that. They're not going to choose those kids. Then you're going to wind up with private schools being funded with, for students, for the top performing students, and then you have everybody else left back in the underfunded, even more grossly underfunded ISDs. Talking about underfunding, you're right, 49th in this country, so it's not ridiculous to say that our schools are underfunded here, and it does take money to educate kids. The 6% of campuses who do not meet state standards, almost all of them, it's a result of poverty, and they need additional funds to help lift those students out of poverty. Yeah.
Corey, is there a mechanism for a testing or some kind of report card that might
What room?
I didn't touch it. That's weird. Sorry. Is there, I was asking back on the accountability question, is there some sort of mechanism or report card or testing result that you would support as part of the education choice so that parents can get some reading on those schools?
Look, as far as underfunding is concerned, first of all, we're not 49th in Texas. We're 38th. Look at the U.S. Census Bureau's annual system.
We're 49th.
Google it. The annual system of school system.
Look on the Texas Education Agency.
Okay, let's come back to that. I'd like to stay on accountability.
Google is really accurate on everything.
And
look at Facebook.
Texas has also increased student funding by 166% after adjusting for inflation since 1970. Legislature just passed $10 billion in more public school funding. $4 billion still pending. But as far as additional accountability mechanisms, I do think bottom-up accountability is the best way to do this because we don't want to overregulate the private schools with a lot of the testing that the public school defenders rail against. How about instead, if anything, let's not ratchet up the red tape that's problematic for the public schools to the private schools and make them more like the public school. Let's deregulate the public school. I think we could actually agree on that. We should level the playing field and allow for the public schools to compete a little, have a little better chance at competing in an open market. So I think if we can rethink the testing regime in the public schools, I'd be for that. And then as far as if we didn't do that, we had to have some testing in the private schools. If you're going to implement some form of testing, it shouldn't be a state test. It should be a nationally normed test that private schools can choose. A lot of private schools are doing some testing one way or the other. Parents are already demanding it without it required. So private school at least choose their test instead of saying the state test has to be required in all. So then with national reference, you can still compare testing across schools.
Yep. Let me come back to you on the funding question. One concern that I have is the mantra that we often hear is that we need our schools quote unquote fully funded, and I never hear a number attached to that. Can you describe, and you talk about the rankings in terms of whether it's 39th or 49th, but what does that look like, and where does that money come from?
That's a great question. So if you'll allow me, with my statistic at 49th, in order for us to get to average, if we want to be 25th in funding, we have to add today. We would have to add $40 billion to get to average across this country in per pupil investment.
So what's the dollar?
And we're nowhere. Well, let's start with what the voucher bill that was passed by the Senate on Friday. They passed $8,000. Let's start with bringing every school district $8,000. We're talking about operating dollars. We're not talking about the other dollars that school districts get local voter approval to expend. When you're talking about 10,000 plus per student, that includes whatever bond dollars and other dollars that the school districts have. But if you want to actually compare what we're talking about how much does it cost to operate the school district? What is the spending per student? So that's how you got to look at that, because every district has a vastly different amount of bond dollars that have been and have not been passed over the years.
So the average public school in Texas spends about $15,700 per student, according to the TEA website, 2021-2022. We shouldn't just look at, just the state portion or just certain allocations. We should look at how much the school spends per student, about $15,700 per student. So when you first started with the 8,000, I was about to say, okay, let's cut the spending in half. But the reality is I don't have a take on what the optimal funding amount should be per student. But the average private school tuition in Texas, according to Private School Review, is about $10,600 per student. Far less.
14,000. That's what it is. 14,000.
Google it. Average private school
School
tuition.
tuition, 14,000. And our schools do not spend $15,000 per student. That's just ridiculous.
I look forward to clipping this conversation
Is
later with the
Please do.
statistics right next
Please
to it.
I'm-
Because- all right.
Well, I'm sure there's thousands of people watching this out on Facebook. They're posting stuff right now behind both of us. So I'm sure that's happening. Seeing all the little emojis flying.
That's right. Debate will go on.
Sure that's
Uh,
happening.
Let's come back to the religious liberty question. Corey, I'll start with you. You mentioned this at the top. I want to take it from a different angle, which is not so much should the government be giving funding to religious institutions, because as you said, that happens on several fronts. Why shouldn't those schools be concerned about, once somebody's writing a check, even if it's going through the parents, you start to get interference in things, and what kind of protections would there be for private schools?
This is one of the reasons why I argue against the state testing mandates, and to allow for maximum flexibility on the part of the schools to kind of quell these concerns as well. And I really do think the strongest form of accountability, nothing is perfect, is bottom-up accountability, voting with your feet. So look, I've heard this argument many times. I think it's making perfect the enemy of the good. I just debate on this in New York with the Soho Forum, and you can check that out on Reason TV, Reason Magazine YouTube channel. But basically, it's making perfect the enemy of the good. We already have the government can already regulate private and home education if it really wanted to. If you had authoritarians in office who are willing to do so, and they've done so historically in Oregon, for example, in 1922, they outlawed private and home education. That wasn't because of the school choice program. That was because you had authoritarians in office forcing families to send their kids to the government institutions to be raised in ways that were aligned with their values and parents' values. And thankfully, in 1925, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned that bigoted law in Pierce v. Society of Sisters, where the court famously said the child is not the mere creature of the state. In New York City today, they have some of the worst homeschooling laws in the books. You have to be in the 33rd percentile and have the right to raise your own children at home or to homeschool them. And they don't have a private school choice program in New York. So in general, the states that have more education freedom in the form of school choice also have more education freedom in terms of lax homeschooling laws and not as much regulations for homeschooling. So don't make the enemy of the good. And look, Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, who pushed to keep schools closed as long as possible, to hold children's education hostage to ransom payments all across the country. She's repeated the same argument that, it's going to come with government strings, and that would be a problem. She's not saying that because she's some libertarian, anti-government type. She's a big government socialist who knows that if she repeats this often enough, she might be able to block school choice not only in blue states, but in red states as well. So if you're on Randy Weingarten's side, you're probably on the wrong side of freedom.
Don't get me started on Randy Weingarten.
Scott,
Maybe we can agree on the Randy Weingarten.
Let's reduce testing, all that fun stuff. So here's where I am on the religious side of it. As a conservative Texan, I pay my taxes. I do not want to pay for private religious educations when some of those religions, you can't just pick one, it's all of them. Okay, it's Christianity, it's Judaism, it's Hinduism, it's Buddhism, it's Islamic, radical Islamic education. I'm sorry, indoctrination. By the way, we hear a lot. The irony of who is championing these voucher bills in Texas just blows me away, because there is nothing more counter-conservative than a voucher to pay for religious indoctrination. Our public schools are being crucified in public debate by people like Corey for indoctrinating our kids, which that is absolutely not happening in Texas. I'm not going to say it's not happening in other states, but it's not happening in Texas. At least not, it's not organized. There might be a teacher or two here and there. They're an anomaly. It's not the norm. But here's what happens in private schools. The purpose of a private religious school is to indoctrinate children into Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. And I don't want a single penny of my personal dollars that I pay taxes to educate all children. I do not want it to fund a private education of an anti-American radical Islamic education system. It blows me away. That's what the governor wants. It blows me away. It's so radically frustrating as a conservative who voted for Abbott because he's the guy on the ballot.
I mean,
Go ahead, Corey.
I mean, I think this is all about religious liberty, though. They're not your kids. If the Muslim parents want to send their kids to a Muslim school, that's all fine and dandy with school choice. And like, it's just, I don't want to force you to send your kid to an institution that doesn't align with your values. Just don't force me to send my kids to an institution that doesn't align with my values. I think we can agree that if we have a different religion or different perspective on life and how our kids should be raised, we should be able to go our separate ways and choose difference. I mean, you just said you object to kids being sent to Islamic schools on taxpayer dollars. Well, some taxpayers, that's an argument against taxpayer funding itself, not against school choice. You can make the same argument where people could say, well, I'm against my tax money going to public schools that indoctrinate kids in other types of ways. Maybe it's not religious. Maybe it's a religion we call CRT or gender ideology happening in the classroom. And it does happen in Texas. There's been a video coming out from Accuracy in Media they put out asking public school officials, well, if they ban CRT in this state or that state, what are you going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to call it social emotional learning.
CRT, Texas.
That's
banned.
it's banned. Forcibly, and people are still doing it and calling it something else. I don't have to think on what the curriculum ought to be. I don't care if you send to a school that has something that I don't personally agree with, but that's.
I don't care. I don't want to pay. I don't want to religious education that conflict with my own beliefs.
People can say the same thing about public schools that spend twice as much amount as in the private.
No, they do not.
Okay, let me in here and on to another form of religion that's important in Texas, and that's Friday Night Lights. There's been some talk, particularly in smaller communities, that school choice is going to drain away kids who might have sports specific academies. But I also want to hear from both of you about, the public schools, especially in smaller communities, in the suburbs, are the organizing force of the community. It's where the parents tell the other parents and things like that. So what happens if that gets diminished, and what are the risks, if there are any, or how do we keep the lights on Friday night? Or you can start.
Yeah, I'll just say, if you like your public school, you can keep your public school. If the public school is truly the lifeblood of the community in a rural district, you can still choose that school and nothing's going to change. If you have fantastic public schools in your area, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. You should be the last person arguing this is going to be a threat to your community. And you'll hear legislators.
If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. How'd that work out?
Yeah, that's why I said for real this time earlier. And the public schools do improve in response to competition. But in rural areas, you'll hear a legislator who's trying to pretend to be a Republican while voting against their own party platform issue. They'll say, on the one hand, in my rural district, we can't use school choice. The public school is the only option. But then in the next breath, with a straight face, they'll try to tell you school choice is going to decimate our fantastic rural public schools. Well, if it's so fantastic, you have nothing to worry about. But two, if the public school is the only option, you're not going to lose any money because public schools are funded based on enrollment counts. Families aren't going to leave public schools to private schools if you don't have private schools in the area. And by the way, the 9 most rural states in the country already have some form of private school choice, including West Virginia, which is far more rural than Texas, had the first universal school choice program in the country. And also Maine and Vermont, two of the most rural states in the country, started the oldest voucher programs in the late 1800s for students in rural areas that didn't have access to public schools. They're so rural, they figured out that they should expand education choice and opportunity by giving funding to families so they could choose public schools in nearby districts or in private religious or non-religious schools. They figured out that if you don't have choice, that's not an argument to diminish it even further, it's an argument to expand it. And Maine and Vermont figured that out over 100 years ago. Hopefully Texas figures it out this special session.
I don't think Corey understands how our public schools are funded because they're funded by attendance, not enrollment. And that's a significant difference. That's a significant difference. And there's only one pot of money. It all comes out of the same pot. And when you take $1 billion here and $1 billion there and $7 billion and then $10 billion as time goes on, that's less money in that pot to divvy out to the rest of the ISDs around Texas. It's just a fact. There will be less money for public ed. And once those vouchers pass, the legislature, whether
it's enrollment or attendance, if you have no student leaving your rural public school, you're not going to lose funding. That is not a significant difference, even if you want to say that it is. If you have attendance at the school or enrollment at the school of 1,000 kids or however much it is, 500 or 250, if you're not losing, my point was, if you're not losing any students, if you're really saying this is the only option in that area, you should be the last person arguing that this is going to defund the schools because no one's going to leave, whether it's attendance or enrollment.
Well, I know your point. I was just pointing out that you don't understand how public schools are funded. That's all.
Scott, do you want to talk about this, the concerns about community and sports in general with the public schools?
Let me tell you what. Okay, so people have forgotten the purpose of public ed, not just in Texas, but in this country. It's getting lost in the divided political environment that we're in today. The public schools are a safe place for the community to bring their kids together to govern their own schools. They're not government schools. They are run by the local communities. They are funded or underfunded by the state government. Okay, and so you start chipping away, you start pulling kids out here and there. You don't have that unity in that school system. The school system is the center of every community, especially those rural communities. But even in my community, school is a big deal. It's a big deal. We lose kids to charters, and our schools are losing funding as a result. Every kid who leaves public school, them and their money goes to the charter school that's right there in my neighborhood. By the way, the charter school was built a half a mile from a ISD school that's rated an A. Ask yourself why that is. I didn't answer the question about sports.
Let me move us along to issues of student achievement, which I think is getting lost in some of this debate. Scott, I'm going to start with you. One thing that I'm concerned about, that our editorial board has been concerned about, is that we have a crisis that's been exacerbated by the pandemic, but of the basics of reading and math and kids not being on grade level, and particularly in minority communities. So setting aside the ESA debate for a moment, what kind of measures do you want to see to target that? Because you cited the state accountability ratings earlier, the grades. That's fine and good. Look at the test scores, right? Yeah. And we all know that. So what are you, if you're going to say this isn't the answer, what are the answers or some of the answers?
Well, I'll tell you what, let's first take the punitive nature away from the testing. Use the testing for what it was intended for, which is simply to assess where students are. And one of the reasons why our students don't score well on STARS, because third graders are being tested on a 5th grade level, 4th graders on a 6th grade level. The tests do not match the grade level that they're testing. That's an unfortunate reality. Our own Commissioner of Education admitted that last fall. So that's a problem. But there's lots of problems. But there's also, and those tests, they're just given on one day. You know, a student takes a test on one day in the spring. And then that test, depending on how they're feeling, maybe they got a cold, maybe they're hungry, whatever, that test determines the entire rating of that kid. And the test-driven nature that we have in our schools is forcing our schools to focus on that test. And we don't want that. Nobody wants that, especially your educators. They want to focus on the art of teaching, connecting with kids, loving your kids, and teaching them. And by the way, we do have some of the most successful schools right here in Texas. I got lots of data in my head. I'm not going to share it all with you, but just by way of example, If you push aside the STAR scores and you just look at graduation rates in Texas, we have the highest graduation rates in America. Right here in Texas, we have the highest graduation rates in America when compared to all other 50 states. We consistently rank in the top 5 every single year. 90%. We have an on-time completion rate of 90% statewide. And then you add another 3.5% for kids who just need an extra semester or an extra year to graduate because life happened and they got off track. That's 94% of kids are graduating from school in Texas. And let me tell you, we're not dumbing down the curriculum in Texas. Every legislative session, they add and they add and they add to what our teachers and students are responsible for covering. And they have to demonstrate mastery of content through a whole bunch of measures before they can graduate. And so our kids can read and they can write and they can do some math, graduate high school. The problem that there's such a remedial issue at college levels because the colleges aren't aligned with what our K-12 schools have been forced to teach through the state's adopted curriculum over the last 20 years. There's no alignment between K-12 and higher ed, and so when you talk about it's not remedial, it's about okay, now that they graduate from high school, now they got to go to college and figure out okay, let's get into a whole different system. But we do that. The highest graduation rates, the highest percentages of kids on free and reduced lunch. 2/3 of our students live in poverty, y'all. One of the highest percentages of kids who come from a single parent home or no parent home, and one of the highest percentages of kids who are limited English or no English at all, while ranking 39th isn't good either, 39th or 49th in spending. And so what I'm going to tell you is that Texans are getting a whole lot of bang for their buck because when you look at that graduation rate, that's not just how our high schools are performing. That's how everybody in the public ed system has pulled together and helped you raise your kids from pre-kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. Somebody taught them how to walk in a line. Somebody taught them how to read along the way. Somebody fed them lunch every single day. It's a team effort. That is a great indicator of where we are in our public schools, not these arbitrary and grossly flawed state mandated tests.
So you had pointed out that the schools help you raise your kids. I firmly believe that kids don't belong to the government and parents are the best primary decision makers for their own kids. And they should be able to determine who gets to help them raise their kids. If they want to send them to the government or public schools, they should be able to choose that. But if not, if you want to have another community helping you raise your kid, you should be able to choose that too, whether it's a charter school. You mentioned Texas already has those, but a private school too. It shouldn't be limited based on the label on the school. It should be up to the parent what's best for their own kids. So I think, if we buy the argument that this is a way to raise your kids, that's even more of a good reason why we should have choice in who's helping us raise our kids.
I don't disagree with you on that. Yeah, parents should certainly steer the direction of their kids' education. If they're not getting a good education in the local school district, then they're free to move. Many school districts are open enrollment school districts. You can go to a different school district, you can go to a different school in town. You can go to one of the 1,028 charter schools all over Texas, and it's all free. It's all complimentary. It's all there. It's all taxpayer funded. Those are public schools, and so to add a third publicly funded school system in Texas is just it's irresponsible. It's not conservatism at all. It's irresponsible to try to fund a third system in the billion-dollar category.
Talking about what's conservative, 88% of Texas Republican primary voters supported school choice on the ballot last year, up 9 points since they last had it on the ballot in 2018. And I know you ran as a Republican against Dan Patrick, who beat you 3-1. But right after you lost that primary race, you went out and endorsed Collier, right, the Democrat.
Absolutely, I did.
So I think the Republican primary voters disagree with you on what is actually a conservative issue. So the Senate's got it done, 18-13. They passed the Senate Bill 1. The Texas House should be able to get it done as well. They have a majority of.
Okay, Corey, let me pivot this.
You're right, Corey. I did lose 3-1, but the fact that I got 25% of the vote is pretty remarkable, considering I spent $100,000 and he spent $10 million.
All right, let's not relitigate that campaign.
I'm just saying. Yeah.
Corey, let me turn this question a little for you. Whatever happens, I think you would probably agree that we are going to have a lot of kids in public schools for a very long time, and in many cases, there will be some of the harder education cases where maybe the parents have some challenges that they can't supplement to get the kid to a private school. So my question is, what else would you like to see in the public school system to buttress that, to ensure that when those kids are still there, that they're getting, frankly, better than they're getting now?
Yeah, I think we hit on this a little earlier and preempted your question a little bit, and I think this is where Milder and I can agree is that we should deregulate the public schools. I think the top-down accountability mechanisms don't actually lead to the better outcomes they purport to try to achieve. And so, but the reason we have those things is because we don't have bottom-up accountability. So you have, the legislature trying to figure out how to give families some form of quote-unquote accountability, but it's just not a real type of accountability. So if we do expand school choice, I think a good next step, or even at the same time, maybe they do that during the special session, which they have done in other states. In Florida, they went universal this year with their school choice initiative for private schools as well, and they deregulate the public schools at the same time. So I'm fully on board with that. I think we should level the playing field, allow for true competition, and allow families to decide and provide the best form of accountability, which is from the bottom up. So as far as reducing the stakes associated with the state test, or allowing for some other types of deregulation, I think I would probably agree with just basically about everything that Scott would propose, as long as we also have choice for parents in the form of Senate Bill 1 or something similar. I don't think it should be limited to $500 million. It should be in every single family. It is a universal in the sense that it's all families regardless of income or background, but there's a cap on the amount of funding of $500 million. The public school system in Texas spends a lot more than that. It's about $86 billion per year compared to the $500 million.
That includes higher ed.
So it's a little bit less, and then there's the $10 billion floating around. It's a large amount higher than the $500 million. But the point is, every student using these the funding, the scholarship, it's only about $8,000 per kid, whereas the public schools are spending about twice that amount, $15,700 per kid. We shouldn't limit that based on a certain pot of money to protect the government-run schools. Perhaps to start, it's a good start. I really do think it is a good start at $500 million, but there's other states like Arizona that have no cap at all. It's if you're eligible, you're eligible. You can have that opportunity to take your kid to a private school. In Arizona, it's similar. Their public schools spend $14,000 per kid, and the average scholarship is about $7,000 per student. So similar to a Texas proposal.
I'm going to need you to share your data source with me because I don't want to not believe you. But my data is dramatically different.
On the public school
funding
in Texas?
per student. Yeah, funding per student.
I'll text you the TA.
Okay,
You guys are going to be best friends by the time this is all
Might
over.
be looking at current expenditures, whereas I'm looking at total expenditures.
Yeah.
Scott, let me come back over to you then. One of the concerns that I hear from advocates of school choice that I think they make a good point is that the public schools are not as innovative as maybe we need in an era where everything is customizable for the kid or for the family. Are there some innovations that you would support or that you've seen that would be promising to help nudge the schools, if you will, into providing more specific pathways and child-focused outcomes for them?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's unfortunate because the nature of news report the anomaly of the day. That's what they do. They don't report all the great things happening everywhere. Not usually. It's usually the one thing that doesn't fit, the one thing that went wrong somewhere. That's the nature of news. I have a degree in journalism. That's what they taught me. And so they don't report the great things that are happening out there. And frankly, there have been many, many innovations in our public schools, and competition has. This charter school system that we have, it's been around for longer than 20 years, but that competition out there, our educators, they're not sitting back in their there's no ivory towers. I don't know if you've been to some of these. They're not sitting back and kicking back and just, collecting money and spending your money willy-nilly. They are innovating. There's some incredible programs in our public schools. Most our school districts across Texas offer dual credit hours, so that kids graduate with up to 60 hours of college credit, and some of them even get an associate's degree before they get their high school diploma. That's remarkable. That's happening everywhere. There's all kinds of career tech programs going on where there are hundreds of different job certifications that they're earning while in high school. So when they leave high school, they're immediately employable in the workforce. And they can either use that to pay their bills and support their family, or they can use that to put themselves through additional learning. It's remarkable. And so I would say, and again, frankly, it takes money. Well, I'm going to tell you what, it takes people. It takes people. And if they don't have enough people to address and to innovate, then they can't innovate. And when you rank 49th or 39th in spending, in spending per student, it's hard to innovate, especially when you're trying to comply with all the unfunded mandates and the insanity that is the legislated public education system here in Texas. For every person in a classroom, we have to have somebody outside a classroom just to comply with all of the laws that the legislature has thrown at our public schools over the years. So
Scott, I just heard you say that competition led to more innovation. So by that logic, should we expand more competition? No. But I caught your other point of that. That was if we don't have enough funding to actually do the innovation. So could there be a compromise? Let's say this year they allocated more money to the schools, maybe $10 billion. Maybe then we expand school choice at $500 million.
That's a good question.
To kind of
I'm going to say
buttress that competition and lead to more innovation with more funding too. Because I'm not here like really arguing about what the funding should be.
I know.
I don't know what that number is. My argument is if we're gonna have the funding and if we're gonna allocate more funding, we should also have choice, lead to more competition, lead to more innovation, then we could have a win-win. Families more opportunities, the public schools improve, they innovate more. And I think we can actually really agree here that the way to get to more innovation would be to deregulate public schools. And I think that could be where we find some common ground today.
We need to give our schools more wiggle room to teach, for the teachers to teach with the art of teaching that they know and they desperately desire. Our teachers love your kids, almost all of them. There's a few out there who, they're not really.
Wait, are you talking a few teachers or a few kids? You better clarify that.
I'm going to say teachers. I'm not going to comment on children. Right? Yeah, but I mean, let's see. So what I'm going to say is no. I don't think that we should compromise on this. I think I have talked to a lot of people, a lot of school leaders, a lot of people who advocate for public education, and we all would rather see no additional funding for public ed and no vouchers than additional funding for public ed and vouchers, because public dollars need to be kept in the public and accountable to the public. Okay, vouchers. First of all, gifts of public funds are illegal, at least until the legislature makes it not so. Vouchers are ripe for corruption, not construction, but there would be some construction.
We were so close to agreeing. Now you're reading your notes.
Well, I am, because I'm prepared.
Hang on, let me jump in because I want to give you both a good couple of minutes for a closing if you'd like. But you've both done these kind of events, and actually you've found some common ground here tonight, which I was not fully expecting. But I'm curious if, in having done this and having been on these involved and passionate on these issues, has there ever been anything you've heard from an opponent in a forum like this that's made you think, oh, maybe I'm wrong about that? Is there anything you've changed your mind on in this realm? Scott, let me start with you.
No. Not today, anyway. I mean, but I'm a reasonable, rational person. And just because I disagree with somebody doesn't mean I don't like them, right? Look at this. Here we go. We can get along.
We did it, folks. We solved it.
That's what's so frustrating about the state of politics today. There's so much hate out there, and then that hate winds up focused on things like our public school system, and the people in our public school system don't know how to defend themselves against that. They're just teaching they're teaching their faces off. What are they supposed to? I mean, how are they going to? They don't want to be in politics. They're conflict avoidant. That's the nature of people who join the education profession are conflict avoidant. So, and then what? Well, I'll save that for my.
Yeah, let me go ahead. Corey, I'm curious. The same question because I know you've done a lot of these.
I think Scott makes a good point that we got along even before the debate started or discussion started, and we've been giving each other fist bumps the entire time. So it's a pleasure to be around someone that's this friendly, even if we disagree in stark terms on policy discussions. But
I disagree with my wife a lot, but she's right.
My wife is always right too. So there we go. We can agree there.
We can.
But yeah, look, I think as far as any of the arguments I've heard, I don't find any of them convincing. I've written a co-edited a volume called School Choice Myths, where we knock down the arguments. You can also go to AFC School Choice Myths. We have the 9 most common arguments against school choice with bullet point responses if you want to check them out. But I think there's a confusion about when people say that we've defunded education. It's when people say that, it's always verifiably false if you look at the long-term trend after adjusting for inflation. In Texas, for example, between 1970 and 2020, That amount has increased 166% according to the National Center for Education Statistics after adjusting for inflation. But for the same period, if you look at teacher salaries, they've only increased by about 10%. So where's all the money going? So I think when you hear teachers complaining about the supply, you need to pay out of pocket for supplies, that the money's not making its way into the classroom, I kind of agree with them on that. But it's not a shortage of money overall. It's a problem of incentives to spend those additional dollars wisely. We talk about people at the top making a lot of money. Superintendents in Texas, there are about a handful of them that make more than Joe Biden, the president of the United States, over $400,000 a year. In Dallas, right next door, the superintendent, despite having a 32% proficiency rate, it makes it in base salary. Last year, it's probably higher now, $338,000 per year. So it's a ton of funding. It's not making its way into the classroom. The teachers aren't seeing the raises. Hopefully, in the special session, with the additional $4 billion that the Republicans, I believe, are ready to allocate to public education towards teacher salaries, they can come to an agreement. Let's spend more money, but let's also give families additional choices at the same time.
And let's wrap up this way. Let's say that the House is going to vote tomorrow on the bill that the Senate sent over, and it's a tie vote, and you have to stand in front of the last tie-breaking legislator and make your best argument. Go, Scott.
All right, so I'm gonna go back to my conservative roots, and I'm gonna say, look, man, if a man might be a woman in the legislature, I'm not gonna say look woman. That wouldn't go over well, probably. Look person. Yeah, look person. And I am going to refer to my notes here because I want to make sure I get it right. I did do my homework. Just as a conservative-minded Christian voter in Texas, here's the thing about vouchers. Vouchers, the gifting of public funds is not conservative. You're gifting public funds. Spending tax dollars with no public oversight is not conservative. Expanding government, which is exactly what this is, through entitlement programs and subsidies for private institutions is not conservative. Duplication of public services, actually triplicate, because we already have duplication through charter schools, and now we're going to have vouchers, which is a third publicly funded school system, is not conservative. Let's just fix the 6% that aren't making the grade. Let's do that. That's going to cost a lot less than billions of dollars for vouchers. Funding anti-American, Islamic indoctrination is not conservative, especially right now with what's going on over in the Middle East, and then this call for jihad in America. That bothers me. Funding, let's say, undermining the Texas Constitution. The Texas Constitution is specific about what the state legislature is required to do with public education dollars, and that's to put them into public system of education, not a private system. I can read that to you. Reckless appropriation of public dollars is not conservative, and paying 8% fees on $1 billion that'll benefit roughly 57,000 kids out of the 5.5 million that we have in our school system, most of which are going to be the kids that are not the ones who the legislation is intended for. It's just not conservative. It's reckless and irresponsible. That's what I would tell them.
Corey, change their mind.
We have administrative fees in the public school system too. Are we going to get rid of all of those because that's not a concern? Are you going to call to get rid of the Department of Education? Maybe you would at the
Yes.
federal level. So let's do that. Let's start there. But look, it is so I'll just take the opposite of that for my closing remarks. It is a conservative issue. Look, man, you endorsed Mike Collier, Democrat, right after you lost to Dan Patrick. So I don't know if you should be the one saying what's conservative or not, especially when 88% of Texas Republican primary voters supported school choice on the ballot last year, up 9 points since they last had it on the ballot in 2018. University of Texas Austin polling, University of Houston polling, and others have found a majority of Texans support school choice. Dallas Morning News also, sorry, I'm talking about another news site. I don't know if that's a problem, but they also found a majority of Texans support school choice, and the support is higher among Republicans than Democrats and independents, and the support is higher in rural areas even than in non-rural areas. So this is a top 8 GOP Texas legislative priority, and at the state level, it's also a Republican Party platform issue at the national level as well. So this is a conservative issue, and especially if you want to talk about the Constitution, every single state has an education clause in their Constitution. The requirement to provide A does not forbid you from providing B or C. So it hasn't been an impediment in other states, even though we all have state education clauses in our constitutions. Texas isn't special in that way. And look, Each voucher is only about $8,000 per student. I think we've all agreed that that's the amount in the bill, and that's about half of what they're spending in the public schools. You can look it up at TEA, which is about $15,700 per student. So it's a taxpayer benefit. It's an individual freedom benefit. It's on the Republican Party platform. Governor Abbott has made this an emergency item during the regular session. He's called a special session on the issue, and Abbott ran on this as well in front of the voters. Beto O'Rourke, who went to private school himself, total hypocrite. That's another issue here. 2/3 of the Democrat senators who voted against school choice in the Texas Senate either went to private school or sent their kids to private school. 8 of the 12 who voted no in the Senate. And it's just total hypocrisy. I don't blame you for sending your own kids to private school or benefiting from private education yourself, but you shouldn't turn around, pull up the ladder behind you, and tell less advantaged families they shouldn't be able to have education freedom as well. We should expand opportunities, not restrict them. And it's time for Texas to do this. Look, there's been red state friendly competition doing this already. 10 states have passed universal school choice policies for every single family in 2 years alone, because conservatives in particular have woken up to the woke indoctrination happening in so many public schools all across the country. So 10 states with GOP trifectas minus North Carolina, who had Governor Roy Cooper, who sent his own kids to private school, total hypocrite, didn't have the power to avoid a veto override in the state of North Carolina. So Texas should be next. There's the momentum is on our side, and it's about time the Texas legislature empowers every single family with education freedom. The Senate's already done their job. It's time for the House to get on board too.
Okay,
Angeles just indicated that he's against indoctrination.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I want to thank our panelists. They both traveled to get here, and we really appreciate that and their time and their energy. Let's give them a round of applause. I want to say thank you to my colleagues, our technical team, and the Star Telegram staff that helped set this up. For those of you watching online, or those of you who are here when you head home, share the video, tell your friends. We'd like to do more of these. We'd like to hear from you on what topics you'd like us to address. Again, we're trying to dive in on policy and not politics, and I think we were 90% there. So good job, gentlemen. Remember, you can get coverage of this issue and everything in the legislature and in politics and government at startelegram.com, and you can get all of our opinion content at startelegram.com/opinion. Thank you. Good night.